Think Again by Adam Grant. I really enjoyed this book. Can I just tell you, I don't do webinars for all the books I read. Some of them I read and I think, well, it's got one idea or two ideas, but not enough. Not enough that's meaty enough and worthwhile sharing with you. This book has got plenty in it, so it's a highly recommended book. In it, Adam Grant says, yes, it's great having a high IQ. That's wonderful. But in addition to learning stuff and thinking well, we all need to get better at relearning, at changing our minds, developing the ability to change our minds. In the book, he provides a number of methods for assisting us to change our own minds, but also to change other people's minds, strategies and techniques, to have conversations where we can help others to update their thinking. And he also has some important things to say about how we can help people in the workplace, how we can create cultures, learning cultures, in which we can all help each other to update our thinking as and when necessary. He begins the book with an intriguing study. He says there were 100 new startups, and they took these 100 new startups and they all received the same training on how to develop a business plan, how to speak to customers, to establish their needs, how to develop a minimum viable product, etc. They all got that. But 50 of the group, half of the group, got some additional training. They got training in how to look at results with a sort of scientific mindset. That's to say, to be willing to look for evidence that disconfirms their earlier hypotheses about what would be a good business idea. Because as you may know, and I know we've got a lot of entrepreneurs on the call, we can get quite attached to our initial business ideas. We can get quite certain that they're going to be big winners. Well, half of this group were taught to realistically evaluate feedback and to change their business plans as necessary. After 1 year, they looked at the results, and the first half that didn't get the scientific training, they made on average about $300 each. Not so much. The other 50, they made on average $12,000 each. That's 40 times as much. And the reason was they were willing to pivot. They were willing to change their minds, update their business plans with real life feedback. So what we're talking about today is highly relevant to anyone who's working in the business field, but it's also important if you are in a relationship, if you care about your health, if you have any kind of job. And the reason is the world is changing. The things we knew that may have been right in the past need not necessarily be right today. Technology is changing. The business landscape is changing. The way we work is changing. And you and I, we're changing too. So it pays to be willing to change our minds, to think again. Adam makes the point that all of us prefer, how does he put it? The comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt. The comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt. It's true, isn't it? We like certainty. We like knowing, the feeling of knowing what we know. But it's that can hold us stuck in place. So he wants to help us to be able to update our thinking as and when necessary. What was next? Oh, perhaps I should just say, for those that don't know me, my name's Eric Winters, and I help people have better conversations at work. What kind of conversations? Well, coaching conversations. I run coaching training in organizations and help leaders ask more questions, tell people less, empower others through conversational styles. I also help people have hard conversations, the difficult conversations, perhaps giving critical feedback to people. There are strategies for doing that more effectively that protect relationships, even build relationships. And I also help people to disagree with one another well. We'll hear later on in this workshop, this webinar. It's really important that we can have workplaces where we disagree courteously, politely, but effectively with one another. So Adam says we all get stuck in the overconfidence cycle. The overconfidence cycle, well, what this means is that we take pride in our decisions and the beliefs we have. We feel good about them. But those early beliefs, they harden quite quickly they crystallize into convictions. And then our normal human biases kick in. There's the confirmation bias, where we see what we expect to see. Our minds actually filter out disconfirming evidence, even when it's right in our face. So we see what we expect to see. Then there's the desirability bias kicks in. We see what we want to see. Then we get this sense of validation. I knew it. I knew I was right. We love that feeling, don't we? I knew it. And then we take greater pride and we just get stuck in this overconfidence cycle. Now, you may be thinking, well, this won't happen to me. I'm quite smart. I expect this doesn't happen to smart people. Wrong. It turns out that the more intelligent you are, the more stuck you can get, because the better you get at defending your initial position. And also, people with higher IQs are more likely to believe they have no biases. So it gets worse the brighter you get. Instead of the overconfidence cycle, Adam says, look, what we need to engage in is a rethinking cycle. And it all begins with humility, an intellectual humility. And this simply means you're willing to consider that you might not know everything. Fancy that. Not obviously most, but you might not know everything. There could be additional perspectives that you don't have. Your information may be partial. When we can open up just a little bit of intellectual humility, and you can allow yourself to doubt that everything you've decided in the past and everything you believe is necessarily 100% correct. Doubt fuels curiosity, a willing to look a little bit further. And curiosity fuels discovery of things that we didn't know. And there is a pleasure to be had in discovering that there's more, that we hadn't got it completely right or right at all. And we can take pleasure in updating our thinking. And that fuels more humility, which goes on to greater doubt and curiosity. So that's the rethinking cycle, the importance of humility. Now, in addition, what Adam tells us is that we all have a problem we've got problems in multiple domains, but we have a problem when we get just a little bit of knowledge. When we know a little bit about something weird happens. And there are two researchers looked into this, and they discovered when people know just a little bit, their confidence rockets up disproportionately for how much they actually know. The names were David Dunning and Justin Kruger. This effect is now known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it happens to us all. We all run the risk at times of getting caught on the peak of Mount Stupid. Now, what is this Mount Stupid? Well, as we said, if you get a little bit more knowledge on a topic, your confidence, or as this chart says, your willingness to opine on a topic shoots up. And we can all of us end up thinking, oh yeah, I'm across this. I know all there is to know. And when we think that we know pretty much all there is to know, we have no curiosity and we don't look for additional evidence. We don't try to learn more. We can get stuck on the top of Mount Stupid. Now, who would do this? All of us at times. According to one study, it looked at managers who were rated by their employees as having the lowest levels of skills in listening. They were rated as the very worst listeners in the organization. And when those dreadful listeners were asked, how would you rate your own capability to listen? 95% of them said they were good or very good listeners. So there's an awful lot of us out there who believe that our competence is much higher than it really is. There's I love this a cartoon which was taken from the book. Let me interrupt your expertise with my confidence. It turns out that in leadership, men tend to have an inflated idea of their leadership capability. Who'd have thought? Men. And women, on average, tend to discount their leadership skills. So both of us, men and women, we need to get a more realistic sense of our competencies. Now, how are we going to do that? How are we going to get better at adjusting, being willing to learn, willing to see the evidence for what it is? Well, Adam says, you know what we need to do? We need to get better at detaching. It's detaching. He says there are two things. If we want to get better at learning, there are two things that we need to get better at detaching from. Here they are. The first one is detaching our present from our past. That's to say, the person you are today is not the person you were in the past. You've grown, you've learned, you've had experiences. It's okay to understand that earlier you, version 1 or what have you, your earlier version made the best decision they could with what they knew back then. Knowing what you know now, it's okay to update your thinking. You are not the same person that you were. The other thing that Adam encourages us to detach are our opinions, what we believe, what we think, from our identity. Detaching opinions from identity. This is to say that you are not your thoughts. You have thoughts, sure, and it's okay to update your thinking, to learn stuff, and you can still be you. But what he does say, it's worthwhile to ground our identity in, our sense of self, is or are our values. He says what's helpful is to recognize what is persistently important to you. Now, it could be learning. It might be being fair, being honest, being bold, perhaps, being creative. The important thing is to find out what are the things that you value and attach your identity to those things because they are consistent. Now, in my book, Swipe Right on Your Best Self, I gave, I think, about 9 different techniques to help you to identify what your values are. A lot of us kind of inherit values from our communities, from our families, but it pays to actually revisit them and check and decide for ourselves, actually, knowing what I know now, what will I choose to prioritize in my life? So, detachment, important skill for being able to learn. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to just ask you, remember, intellectual humility is a key ingredient to being able to learn. So I'd like everyone just to practice a little bit, just a little bit of intellectual humility now, right now. Can we all acknowledge that there are some decisions we made in the past that actually we should have updated sooner? It may be that we've stayed in relationships for longer than we should have. The writing was on the wall. The evidence was there. Maybe we stayed in business ventures for longer than we should have. Again, the evidence was there. Has anyone stayed in a workplace for longer than they should have? Or perhaps they've had a habit which is extended for longer than it should have done. In the chat box, I'll be interested in hearing if people can relate to this. What have you invested yourself in and stayed invested in? And it could actually be a financial investment. Maybe Bitcoin. Maybe you stayed in Bitcoin for longer than you should have. What things in life have you stayed in for longer than actually was really helpful? What ideas should we have let go of sooner? And I'm looking at the chat box. I'm not seeing anything, but I know that the text can take a while to creep through. Even after you've pressed enter, it goes around the planet several times before it reaches me. For myself, I can admit to staying in all of those. I've stayed in relationships for longer, business ventures. I've stayed in workplaces for longer than I should have done. Ali, you've mentioned there, let's see if we can share this. You should have learnt to lose toxic team members more quickly. Yes. Oh, Shabba, stayed in a workplace. I certainly have done. Tim, and we've lost the end there, but Tim says, yeah, jobs, financial relationship, businesses, how many do you want? No, we can stop there, Tim. Stop there. Thank you. Yeah. And look, we've got a lot of comments coming through now. I will stay on afterwards to respond to some of the questions. Yes, and Victor, good luck with your shares. A financial advisor of mine used to say that shares and lost investments go to money heaven. They go to money heaven. They're not coming back. Okay, let's move on. Let's jump back to my OBS here. I've got Mount Stupid, detachment, yes. Okay. What is next? The importance of constructive conflict. Now, in workplaces, when you hear the word conflict, it sounds like necessarily a bad thing, doesn't it? Conflict, we don't want conflict. Well, Adam says there's two sorts of conflict. There is relationship conflict, and this is problematic, where personalities clash and people just really don't get along with one another and won't make space for one another. This is not helpful, relationship conflict. But what is really helpful, especially early on in a project, is task conflict. This is where different people have different ideas about how we can achieve the same outcomes. And it's so important in high-performing workplaces and really effective workplaces that people speak up. They share their perspectives. They disagree with energy and vigor, but professionally. Now, what can help constructive conflict to take place is people really knowing one another. So there's a good relationship, a foundation that can survive disagreement. But in addition, what's really important, Adam says, is having the same sets of values. So when people have the same sets of values, then they're willing to engage in disagreements, but energetic disagreements. There's a lovely story in Think Again about the Wright brothers, and they were famous for disagreeing with each other with a lot of energy. But one of the disagreements they had concerned, and remember, this was the first time they were developing powered flight. Things we take a lot of things for granted now, but they didn't know how to do it then. One of the questions they had right at the beginning was, what kind of a propeller? We're going to need a propeller. But what kind of propeller? How big should it be? Where should it be? How many times should it be rotating? They disagreed a lot on this topic. But finally, what they came up with was a different solution, one that neither had thought of originally. And that final solution was to have two propellers, one on each wing, rotating in different directions. So they came up with a better solution because of their willingness to argue and listen to one another, but to disagree constructively. There's also a chapter on debate. How can we change audiences' minds or another individual's mind? And what he says about debate is debaters, skillful debaters, really effective debaters, have a number of skills that they use. And one is they actually listen. Yeah, fancy. They listen to what their opponent, let's say their opponent, has to say. They listen to them and they will validate the ideas that they express, which are good. They validate what's good. And they will look out for common ground. Now, this means that the other person is having the experience, and the audience is experiencing them as being reasonable. So if we want to change someone else's mind, it's best not to take an adversarial stance, me versus you, because people just get riled up and defensive when we attack them. And fair enough, we get defensive when we're attacked. But if you can take the attitude of being more of a collaborative, exploratory conversation, respecting the other person's perspective, then people are more willing to change their minds. So there's an interesting chapter on debate. And also, one of my favorite topics is a chapter on motivational interviewing. Now, motivational interviewing is an approach, and it's developed by, let's get the names right, Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick. And these two guys developed an approach to help someone else to build their motivation, perhaps to change their mind by amplifying their motivation without persuading, cajoling, or urging. It's a very skillful way to talk to someone else in a way that amplifies the motivation that they already have. Now, this skill is invaluable for leaders in workplaces and for people who have kids. And in fact, anyone who talks to anyone else in life when you'd like to help them to build their motivation. So I liken this a little bit to taking an ember. And if you had an ember and you wanted to build a fire from a small ember, you wouldn't get a great big log, would you, and slap it down on top of that tiny ember? No, of course not. Instead, you might blow. You might blow on it gently. You might put some tiny, tiny twigs, the tiniest twigs on it, but you would gently encourage it to build. And motivational interviewing is a little bit like that. It's so important that it's a core part of the coaching training that I do for leaders, teaching people how to have coaching conversations with their teams. This style it's very skillful and it builds relationships. Onwards, what was next? Creative rethinking. Now, those of you who have done anything creative, prepared slides for a slideshow, written a book, generated anything in the workplace that's new, will benefit from this idea. Now, Adam tells the story of Austin, a little boy. He's about 4 years old, just 4 years old in school, and he was told to draw a butterfly in the best way he possibly could. And this is what he came up with. But what Austin did next is he asked his colleagues, in fact, his teammates, these other 4-year-olds, what do you think? And he listened to their feedback and he updated his drawing of a butterfly. Well, he did this several times. He was willing to hear the feedback, which was courteously provided, and he kept rethinking, if you like, rethinking his drawing. Now, the same little boy, without learning any additional skills, finally created this beautiful drawing of a swallowtail. I don't think I could do it. Well, I should take heart. All of us can improve our first drafts. We need to be willing to listen to feedback and act on it. Now, can I just say, when I wrote this, the first draft is pretty ugly. It was pretty bad. But you needed to, when you write anything, you need to be willing to go back and revisit it and update it and change it. I'm training professional coaches at the moment at a training college here in Sydney. They're doing postgraduate leadership training, and they're writing assignments. And the first draft of the assignment, of course, how could it not be a little bit rough? But they go back and they end up creating beautiful butterflies of assignments rather than the sort of ugly first drafts. It's something we all need to do in life. Be willing to not necessarily get it right first time. Be willing to suck at most things, but be willing to go back and try. What was next? Oh yes, learning cultures. I've only got a few minutes left. Learning cultures versus performance cultures. Now, NASA used to be a high-performance culture. Well, it's still high performance, but they prioritized results above all else. Failure was unacceptable. And the problem with failure being completely unacceptable is that people daren't admit they've made mistakes, admit when they're confused, they daren't ask for help. What they needed to do in NASA, and you may recall they had two dreadful disasters. There was the Columbia disaster, wasn't there? And was it the Challenger? Turns out some of the engineers had concerns, but they didn't dare voice them because the workplace didn't have what's known as psychological safety. Didn't have the psychological safety. People didn't dare speak up. They were afraid of looking silly, afraid of being humiliated, attacked, put down. And this is a very dangerous workplace. So Adam Grant says, look, if you're going to have a learning culture where we're willing to update our thinking, to make things better, we need to cultivate psychological safety. See mistakes as opportunities to learn, etc. A lot of information. He says psychological safety is a start, but it's not enough. It's not enough. In addition to that, you need to have accountability. People need to be expected to deliver high quality work. When you get the two together, safety and accountability, then people enter a learning zone. If you just have the accountability without the safety, people live and they work in an anxiety zone. It's pretty toxic. And if you just have the safety without the accountability, then you have a sort of apathy zone where people they're not stretched, they're not expected to step up and do their best work. Psychological safety, really important for learning cultures. To conclude, the final idea we're going to talk about today, and there's a lot more in the book, but Adam says, look, we need to give ourselves 2 checkups a year where we take some time off and review where we're spending our time. Review what we've committed to in our relationships, in our workplaces, and how we're spending our time during our days. Knowing what we know now, is that the best use of our time? Are we investing our energy where we should, or should we be willing to relearn and make some adjustments? He recommends doing this twice a year. Our time is up. That was quick. It felt much quicker than before. We've gone through a few ideas. There was the overconfidence cycle. We began with that. Remember, where our biases were preventing us from actually seeing disconfirming evidence. We need humility to escape it. We can all get stuck on Mount Stupid from time to time with a little bit of knowledge. It's a dangerous thing. We need to detach our past from our present and our identities from our opinions. Conflict is okay, but not the personality conflict, not the relationship conflict. We need task conflict. We can all debate more effectively. We can help people to amplify their motivation through reflecting and listening, but not urging, not cajoling. That doesn't help. Revisiting work will help improve it. And we need to create workplaces where we still have high performance, but we encourage learning. It's okay to speak out. It's okay to disagree. And finally, he recommends a checkup. Out of those ideas, in a moment, I'm going to be asking people who are staying on the call to let me know which ones are most important to you. But for now, we're going to wrap up the recording part of this webinar. Think again, Adam Grant, highly recommended. I got a lot of value out of it. I think you will too. Thank you for joining.